I smiled the night my husband tried to trade me. Not because it was funny. Not because it didn't hurt. But because in that exact second, something inside me stopped breaking and started calculating. For 7 years, I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I swallowed promotions. I softened my opinions. I laughed at jokes that turned me into the punchline. I told myself that love required compromise. It doesn't. It requires respect. And the night he stood in front of our friends and said, "Anyone want to trade wives?" She's too stubborn, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't joking. And when another man looked at me and said, "I'll take that deal. What time should I pick you up?" I said yes. Not because of him. But because of me. What happened after that dinner destroyed my marriage, exposed his insecurity, cost him his reputation, and gave me back the woman I almost forgot I was. If you've ever been the strong one who was quietly shrinking. If you've ever laughed at a joke that cut too deep. If you've ever been told you were too much when you were just enough. This story is for you. Stay until the end, because what I did next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was patient. Strategic. Final. And if you believe no woman should ever have to make herself smaller to be loved, like this video. If you've ever chosen yourself after being humiliated, tell me in the comments, I choose me. And subscribe, because some stories don't just entertain, they remind you who you are. Before the joke. Before the dinner. Before the word divorce stopped sounding impossible. There was my life. My name is Evelyn Carter, I'm 32, and for 7 years I was married to Ryan Carter, my husband, my colleague, my quiet competition. We both worked in marketing at the same firm in Nashville, climbing the same ladder, sitting in the same meetings, chasing the same clients. On paper, we were the perfect power couple. In reality, I was careful not to outshine him. I loved my work. Strategy thrilled me. Campaign launches felt like opening night on Broadway. I was the one who stayed late refining presentations, who noticed patterns in consumer behavior others missed, who could read a boardroom before anyone said a word. I valued excellence. Independence. Growth. But at home, I valued peace more. So when my ideas received praise, I'd deflect. When my campaigns outperformed his, I'd downplay the numbers. When leadership hinted at promoting me, I'd say I wasn't sure I was ready. Not because I doubted myself. Because I knew what would happen if I didn't shrink. Ryan didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. His control was softer. Smiles that tightened just enough. Silence that lasted just long enough. Jokes that landed just sharp enough to remind me who was supposed to shine. "You're intense," he'd say, almost affectionately. "You don't have to win everything." So I learned to dim my light in subtle ways. I chose flats instead of heels when we attended corporate events. I edited my tone. I rehearsed humility. I became smaller in rooms where I used to expand. And the most dangerous part? I told myself this was love. From the outside, we were polished. Beautiful home. Shared car. Joint dinners with friends. At family gatherings in Nashville, people described us as a solid. They didn't see the negotiations happening in silence. They didn't see the way I measured every sentence before speaking. They didn't see how often I asked myself, is this worth the tension tonight? Because the truth is, I knew who I was. I was ambitious. Capable. Strong-willed. And somewhere along the way, I let those strengths become things I apologized for. The night of the barbecue at my sister's house, I arrived wearing a smile I had perfected over 7 years. I didn't know that by the end of that night, the version of me who kept shrinking would be gone forever. And the woman who replaced her would not ask permission to exist. Ryan didn't marry a weak woman. He married potential. When we first met at the agency, he admired my sharp instincts. He used to say, "You see angles no one else sees." Back then, it sounded like respect. I didn't realize it was also surveillance. He wasn't just noticing my strengths, he was measuring them against his own. At work, we were equals in title, but not in results. The first time my campaign outperformed his, he laughed it off in front of the team. "Guess I'll start calling you boss," he joked. Everyone chuckled. I did too. Later that night, at home, he barely spoke. That was Ryan's pattern. Public charm. Private withdrawal. If I succeeded, he went quiet. If I was praised, he became sarcastic. If I voiced an opinion too confidently, he'd tilt his head and say, "You're being stubborn again." Stubborn. It became his favorite word for me. Not driven. Not decisive. Not strategic. Stubborn. He said it playfully at first. Then repeatedly. Then predictably. Until every time I disagreed with him, I felt unreasonable. Until I began softening my voice before he even reacted. And when leadership hinted that I might be considered for a director role, a role that would place me above him, he smiled and said, "That would create tension between us. Is that what you want?" He never forbade me. He made me choose. And I chose him. But something in his eyes changed after that. Because once a person knows you're willing to shrink, they start expecting it. And Ryan had started expecting my silence. The first injustice wasn't dramatic. It was small. Almost invisible. We were in a strategy meeting with senior leadership. I had spent 3 nights refining a proposal for a major client, an idea built on behavioral data I'd quietly gathered for months. When my turn came, I presented calmly. Confident. Clear. Halfway through, Ryan interrupted. "Let me simplify what she's trying to say," he said, smiling at the executives. Trying. He rephrased my strategy in broader, safer terms. Stripped it of risk. Stripped it of brilliance. The room nodded politely. The edge was gone. I felt it. Not anger. Not yet. Just a shift. After the meeting, one of the partners pulled me aside. "Your instincts are sharp, Evelyn. But you let him speak for you too easily." That sentence followed me home. That night, I asked Ryan why he interrupted me. He laughed. "I was helping. You get intense. People don't always follow." Helping. That word wrapped around the insult and made it sound generous. I replayed the meeting in my mind. The way he leaned forward just before I hit the strongest slide. The way he made eye contact with the executives while I stood beside him. He didn't just interrupt me. He repositioned me. And the most unsettling part? He looked proud afterward. That was the first time I realized something dangerous. Ryan didn't want a partner. He wanted an advantage. And I had just seen how easily he could take my voice and make it sound like his. The barbecue at my sister Maya's house in Nashville was supposed to be easy. Music low. Fireflies in the yard. Laughter drifting between folding chairs. Normal. Ryan had a beer in his hand and an audience. That's when he was at his most dangerous. We were standing near the grill when someone teased us about working together. I felt his arm slide around my waist, not affectionate, possessive. He smiled and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Anyone want to trade wives? This one's too stubborn." Laughter. It hit like a reflex. People laughed because it was easier than reacting. My face burned, but I kept smiling. 7 years of practice. Careful, someone joked. Then our neighbor, Daniel Brooks, who had been leaning against the fence, straightened. "I'll take that deal," he said calmly. The laughter faltered. Ryan blinked. "Yeah." Daniel didn't smile. He looked at me. Not at Ryan. At me. "What time should I pick you up tomorrow?" Silence spread like a crack in glass. Every eye shifted to me. This was the moment I was supposed to laugh. Deflect. Protect Ryan's ego. Protect the illusion. Instead, I felt something steady rise in my chest. 7, I said. 7 p.m. Ryan's grip tightened. But I had already stepped away. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The question was no longer whether he was joking. The question was whether I was. The drive home was silent. Ryan didn't yell at first. He waited. That was his style, let the tension thicken until I broke it. You embarrassed me, he finally said, eyes fixed on the road. Not we embarrassed each other. Not that got out of hand. Me. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights and realized something cold and clear. He wasn't upset that he'd humiliated me. He was upset that I hadn't protected him from the consequences. It was a joke, he added. You're overreacting. Overreacting. 7 years of being called stubborn suddenly condensed into one word, irrational. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned to me, jaw tight. You're not going anywhere tomorrow. Don't make this worse. Not please. A command. And that's when I felt the real loss. Not the marriage. Not yet. I lost the last illusion that he respected me. For years, I told myself his insecurity was temporary. That if I loved him enough, softened enough, succeeded quietly enough, he'd feel safe. But safety was never the goal. Control was. Inside the house, he poured another drink. I walked upstairs without answering. My phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel. 7 p.m. I'll be there. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at those words. This wasn't about dinner. It was about whether I was willing to choose myself, publicly. And I knew if I canceled, I'd be shrinking again. I didn't argue that night. That was new. Ryan followed me into the bedroom, voice sharp, demanding reassurance, demanding obedience disguised as reconciliation. Tell me you're not actually going, he said. Tell me you're not that petty. Petty. Another label to shrink me back into place. But I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't cry. I just said, we'll talk tomorrow. And turned off the light. He kept talking in the dark, trying different tactics. Anger. Mockery. Then guilt. You know I was joking. You know how I am. As if his pattern was a personality trait I had agreed to manage. For years, I would have rushed to calm him. I would have reassured him that I loved him, that I wasn't going anywhere, that he was safe. That night, I let the silence stretch. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to win the argument. I was observing him. The pacing. The tone shifts. The way his frustration escalated when I didn't respond. He wasn't upset about losing me. He was terrified of losing control. And something inside me clicked into place. I didn't need to scream to reclaim power. I just needed to stop cooperating with my own diminishment. Lying there in the dark, I made a quiet decision. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., I would walk out that door. Not impulsively. Not dramatically. Deliberately. And once I did, I knew there would be no shrinking back. Morning came like any other. Coffee. Emails. The illusion of routine. Ryan acted normal, overly normal. He kissed my cheek before work, as if the night before hadn't happened. As if public humiliation could be reset with polite behavior. That used to confuse me. Now I recognized it. Image management. At the office, he was attentive, charming, even complimentary in meetings. He wanted witnesses to his version of us. The stable couple. The playful banter. The harmless joke. But I wasn't confused anymore. I spent that day watching him the way I analyze competitors before launching a campaign. I noted his tells, the way he checked my calendar twice. The way he lingered near my desk when I took a phone call. The way he casually mentioned the barbecue to coworkers, framing it as a just teasing. He was controlling the narrative before I even moved. That's when my decision sharpened. This wouldn't be about reacting to him. It would be about repositioning myself. Strategically. At lunch, I stepped outside and called a divorce attorney my sister had once mentioned, just to ask questions. I didn't commit. I gathered information. Timelines. Financial implications. Documentation. Knowledge is leverage. At 6:30 p.m., I went home, showered, and chose a dress I hadn't worn in years. Not provocative. Not defiant. Confident. Ryan stood in the hallway when I walked out of the bedroom. "You're not seriously doing this?" I met his eyes. "Yes. I am." But the dinner wasn't the boldest move I made that day. The boldest move was deciding that whatever happened next, I would not retreat. When I walked out at 6:55 p.m., Ryan didn't stop me. That was calculated. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, wearing that half-smile he used when he thought he was 5 steps ahead. "Go," he said lightly. "Let's see how far this little performance takes you." Performance. In his mind, this was temporary. A tactic. A flare of emotion I would regret and apologize for. He believed I needed him, financially, socially, professionally. We worked at the same company. Our names were linked. Our success had been presented as shared. He assumed I wouldn't risk destabilizing my own comfort. And for years, he had been right. As Daniel's car pulled into the driveway, Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Remember who you belong to." Belong. That word used to anchor me. Now it exposed him. I saw it clearly then. His entire sense of power rested on one assumption, that I was too afraid to disrupt the structure he benefited from. He wasn't worried about Daniel. He was confident I would come home ashamed. So I kissed his cheek gently before leaving. Not affection. Closure. And as I walked toward the car, I realized something almost ironic. Ryan believed he was letting me prove my foolishness. He had no idea he was witnessing the first move of something permanent. Sitting across from Daniel in the softly lit Italian restaurant, I realized how much I had been invisible. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix things. He just listened. Really listened. When I spoke about my work, my frustrations, my life with Ryan, he nodded. No judgment. No correction. No laughter at my expense. For the first time in 7 years, someone treated me like a person, not a possession. Every detail about Ryan's behavior, every pattern of control and subtle manipulation, replayed in my mind. I saw it clearly now, the compliments that felt like traps, the silences that demanded compliance, the public jabs that left invisible scars. And I began to plot. Quietly. Strategically. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't confront. I would observe. Learn the rhythm of his arrogance, his vulnerabilities, the way he assumed I would always yield. By the time the waiter brought our appetizers, I was already 3 steps ahead in my mind. Because respect wasn't just refreshing, it was power. And I intended to wield it carefully. The question that lingered, almost like a pulse, was this: how far could I take him before he realized he had lost control entirely? That night, I didn't rush. I didn't announce a revolution. I made a single, deliberate choice. I stopped hiding. I answered Daniel's questions honestly, laughed when I wanted, didn't soften my tone for Ryan's imagined presence. Each word, each gesture, was measured, but unmistakably mine. Meanwhile, Ryan fumed from afar, unaware I had already begun reclaiming my space. He thought I was still the woman who deferred, who negotiated my life around his ego. Back at home, I left subtle traces of independence. Emails that reflected decisions he couldn't undo. Personal appointments on our shared calendar he hadn't authorized. Small reminders that I existed on my own terms. I didn't need confrontation. I needed strategy. Observation. Patience. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the cruel irony. His arrogance gave me time. Every control tactic, every attempt to diminish me, became material for my plan. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for him to falter. I was creating my own path, and every step made the inevitable reveal closer. The question that kept me awake: could I maintain silence long enough for him to walk right into the trap I was constructing? Days passed, and Ryan's control became almost predictable. He called, he texted, he tried to draw me back into arguments I no longer engaged in. Each attempt was a thread I could trace, a weakness I could map. But then came a complication. One of his colleagues noticed I'd been out at dinner with Daniel. Rumors began, small whispers about the barbecue incident, the neighbor taking her away, questions meant to shame. For a moment, panic flickered. If word spread too fast, Ryan might strike first. He thrived on controlling perception. I paused, considered every angle. I could pull back, deny it, smooth things over. But that would undo 7 years of strategic patience. Instead, I let the whispers circulate just enough to unsettle him, without revealing the extent of my plan. I controlled the narrative by saying nothing, watching his anxiety rise as he miscalculated. By the time the evening came, I understood: the more he tried to assert dominance, the more he exposed himself. And every inch of his confidence became leverage. I had to ask myself, could I maintain this delicate balance long enough for the final move to succeed, or would impatience betray me first? To keep the plan on track, I had to give something up. Not money. Not my dignity. But comfort, the comfort of certainty. I declined an invitation to a high-profile work event Ryan expected me to attend with him. It was a networking opportunity, a chance to shine publicly under his supervision. Walking away felt like losing a piece of myself, but it was necessary. I explained nothing. Smiled politely. Left the house before he noticed. Alone, I reviewed every interaction, every micro-movement of Ryan's controlling habits. I realized that patience was not passive, it demanded vigilance, restraint, and occasional self-denial. Daniel noticed the tension but didn't press. His quiet constancy reminded me that strength doesn't need an audience. That night, I slept lightly, thinking about the coming confrontation. The sacrifice of a single evening of recognition felt small compared to the reclamation of 7 years of stolen power. And yet, I couldn't shake the question: would I remain resolute when the final move came, or would the lure of old habits tempt me to retreat? The night of the restaurant dinner, everything aligned. Every observation, every calculated pause, every sacrifice led to this moment. Ryan's confidence made him predictable, his need to control made him careless. Daniel and I arrived early, letting the table set the tone. Candles flickered, soft music wrapped around the space, and I felt the first true calm I had known in years. Daniel listened, giving me space to speak, and I realized how much power existed in simply being heard. Then, predictably, Ryan appeared. Unannounced. Loud. Drunk. He stormed through the entrance, voice booming, "This is my wife. You're coming home with me right now." The room froze. Patrons turned. Waiters halted mid-step. Ryan's power depended on expectation, and tonight, expectation betrayed him. I stood, steady, calm, and looked him in the eye. "No," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Perhaps I'll never return." Security arrived quickly, ushering him out while murmurs of shock spread across the restaurant. For the first time, Ryan experienced the humiliation he had inflicted on me for years. I sat back down. A subtle smile crossed my face. Patience, strategy, silence, all had worked. The question now was no longer if I could reclaim my life, it was how fully I would live it. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Ryan hadn't returned. He had spent the night nursing his bruised ego while I planned my next steps. I met with my divorce attorney, signed the first papers, and finally felt the weight of 7 years lift off my shoulders. Every detail I had documented, every small indignity I had endured, became evidence not just of wrongdoing, but of my resilience. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a space that was entirely mine. No compromises, no approvals, no shadows of someone else's insecurities. The walls were bare, the air was mine, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. Work flourished. I accepted the promotion I had once declined. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned, painting, running, even weekly piano lessons. Each action was a reclaiming of pieces of myself I had thought lost. Meanwhile, Ryan's downfall began quietly. The barbecue story leaked. Colleagues whispered. His reputation, carefully curated, began to crumble. He couldn't manipulate perception anymore, he had lost control, and with it, every opportunity to rebuild. I watched from a distance, calm. No gloating. No celebration. Justice was quieter than revenge, it was inevitable, born from his own choices. And yet, the most profound change wasn't external. It was me. The woman who had shrunk for 7 years now occupied the entire room, and she had no intention of stepping back. A year had passed since that barbecue. I stood in my sister Maya's backyard once more, surrounded by laughter and the hum of summer in Nashville. But this time, the energy felt different than mine. Confident. Calm. Untouchable. The same yard where Ryan's joke had threatened to define me now witnessed my freedom. Daniel was there, across the yard, a quiet presence. We didn't need words. He never pressured. Never rushed. He had waited, respected the time it took for me to reclaim myself fully. 1 year later, we were together, not because of a rescue story, not because I needed saving, but because I chose someone who saw me clearly and treated me as an equal. As for Ryan, the man who had spent 7 years diminishing me, he was gone from my world. He lost his reputation, his career, and the life he thought he owned. The house he couldn't pay for sat empty, a hollow reminder that control without respect is fragile. I no longer apologized for ambition. I no longer softened my voice. I no longer shrank. I took my seat in every room, at work and at life, fully visible, fully myself. The wife trade was never about Daniel. It was about me. I had learned what every woman deserves to understand, being too much is never the problem. Shrinking yourself to protect someone else's ego is. And now, I am everything I was always meant to be, as seen, respected, and free. The question I leave you with, how long have you been shrinking to make someone else feel bigger? If this story resonated with you, hit like to show you value strength and self-respect. Share your thoughts in the comments, have you ever had to reclaim yourself after being diminished? And subscribe to the channel to hear more stories that inspire courage, strategy, and the power of choosing yourself.